Hi, I'm Eileen Powers, and I'd like to welcome you to this online exhibition called Can You Make Hair for Me? The exhibition is a collaboration between myself and my work as a Leslie MFA graduate student and graduate students from the Expressive Arts Therapy Studio course. In February of this year, I was invited by Dr. Ara Parker to present Can You Make Hair for Me to her students. Many of the students chose to participate in the project, and the result is this collection of photographs. The webpage for the exhibition is divided into two sections. The first section includes artwork by our students. The section below includes artwork I've made with other collaborators. Thank you for visiting and enjoy the show. Please leave a comment. So what is the Can You Make Hair for Me project? During chemotherapy, I invited people to make hair for me, which I then style, model, and art direct into a series of colorful and uplifting self-portraits. Today, I have over 80 heads, I call them heads, made by myself or made by other people, and they're all in a variety of materials, from bicycle tires to paper to lettuce to recycled materials to cotton balls. I invite people to choose materials that they have at home, things that are accessible to them. And my one rule is that it must be something that can stay on my head. And right now I'm modeling a piece of a mop head made by Beth Yance. We all know someone with cancer, whether it's a friend, a family member, an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent, or maybe it's ourselves. What I found having cancer was that people really didn't know how to communicate with me. They didn't know how to talk about difficult topics like treatment and death and chemotherapy. And part of my project is to help build a language and a bridge in which we can discuss these difficult topics. Before I had cancer, I was primarily a portrait photographer. And this is a portrait of my best friend Amy, who was going through chemotherapy at the time. And little did I know, in about a year, 6 months after this picture was taken, that I was going to be diagnosed with cancer. And I was going to be going through almost the exact same treatment series that she went through. During my treatment, I became interested in other people with cancer. And there were many people in my circle of friends who either had cancer or were cancer-free. This is a photo I took of my friend Patty, who had radiation treatment. I was not familiar with radiation treatment, was not something that I needed to have. But as I talked to Patty, I realized how afraid she was of the radiation mask. And I thought of her bravery of putting it on and feeling that confinement and allowing me to take her picture. Thank you, Patty. When my hair finally all fell out, it took me about 6 weeks to look in the mirror. I was terrified. I was afraid of what I was going to see. And I was afraid that I wasn't going to recognize who I was. When you have chemotherapy, many of us lose our eyebrows, we lose the hair on our head, but we lose the hair on our entire body. So it's a very disorienting feeling. When I finally looked in the mirror and got over the shock of what I looked like, I saw a possibility, and I saw a place where maybe I could create something, a space that was different for me, a medium I hadn't worked with before. And I tried to take the negative that I saw in front of me and make it a positive. So I spent a lot of time in the hospital. I had a multi-phased treatment that involved many inpatient stays, some 5 days, 3 days, a week, 2 weeks, or 3 weeks. And in that time, you become ingrained in hospital culture. And what I mean by that is there's a routine associated with being in the hospital. And you get used to when you get your food and when you have to have a walk and when you take a shower and when you get clean clothes. And I think that repetition and that lulling effect really had an effect on my project, which is in effect a repetitious series of self portraits that change over time. Never underestimate pot roast. Pot roast is a catalyst. During my treatment, I had many friends and family members who wanted to make me food. And when you have chemotherapy, it's very difficult to eat. So one day I opened up my freezer and I saw all of these pot roasts and casseroles and things. And I had an idea. I said, instead of having people make food for me, I'm going to take that energy and I'm going to ask them to make hair for me. And that's how I started this project. I didn't start by making hair right away. I first started with just experimenting with my head as a medium. And one of the first experiments I did was to make tattoos and put them on my head and photograph myself with those. My artwork is intended to be a bridge between myself and between people who don't have cancer. And that's part of my artist statement. It was very important to me that I find a way to communicate with people who were well, people who maybe didn't have the language to talk to me as someone who is sick and someone who didn't know if they were going to live or die. And the project really became something of an activity, a community. It was something we could all participate in. And while it wasn't directly talking about cancer, it was in an indirect and active way, in a very expressive way. And the second thing I'd like to mention about the project is I'm very influenced by stock art, publicity photos, and by advertising. And you see that sort of repetitious style throughout the images. They're sort of an ad campaign without a headline. The characters in my project are based on real people. These are people I may have only had a brief encounter with a long time ago, or it might be a teacher, or someone who came to fix my toilet, or someone who fixed my car, someone who stood behind me in line at Dunkin' Donuts. And I really try to capture that memory. So there's a bit of nostalgia that happens when I put on the clothes and put on the hair and form a new character. I'm really looking into myself to remember people that had an impression on me as I try to sort of build and form a new identity for myself. How many times have we heard on the news or read online that some celebrity lost their battle with cancer, or that so and so was such a great warrior and battled as hard as she could against breast cancer? As someone who's had cancer and is now cancer free, I really felt the limitations of those metaphors. And I also felt that they were not congruent with the experience that I was having. Cancer for me was nothing like a battle. It wasn't a war. I've never been in a war. I certainly felt like it was hard and I was working hard, but it wasn't something where I could win or lose. And that was my issue with most of these metaphors. It implies that when you die, you've lost. And I think there's a real problem in all of these colloquialisms. And in my project, I try to take a visual look at what having chemotherapy is like and what cancer was like for me. While I'm still working with the Can You Make Hair For Me project, I am now cancer free and my hair is growing back. And as a natural progression of that change, I've sort of shifted the project into collage, where I take some of the images from the project or from my cancer treatment time, and I build collages out of them to reflect the newness that I feel in this life that's very different from the life I had before pre-cancer. Thank you for coming to the exhibition. Please feel free to leave me a comment. I'd love to know your thoughts. Thank you to everyone who's made this possible. And I'd like to especially thank my partner, Tom, who learned to use the camera and took the bulk of the pictures that you see in this project. Thank you.